Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 32. So this episode is going to focus around Obi-Wan Kenobi, more specifically the issues of the main run of Star Wars comics in which are called the Journals of Old Ben Kenobi. Now there are 3 full issues of Star Wars which have this, and then in issue 37 there's like a mini story as well, so I'm going to go through all of those, and for clarity, the individual issues themselves are basically called From the Journals of Old Ben Kenobi, while the trade paperback collection of all of these stories, including the mini one, and what I'm going to be tackling next week, which is Yoda's Secret War, they're all going to be featuring in a trade paperback version called From the Journals of Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is going to be released in November 2020. So basically just Journals of Obi-Wan is the trade paperback collection of all of them, and the thing I'm doing next week, and the actual sort of name of each of the individual issues is From the Journals of Old Ben. And just for clarity, to my knowledge, this is the last of the comics which feature Obi-Wan Kenobi heavily. There may be more that come out in the future, but at present there aren't any others, apart from the ones I've already tackled on the show. So just for clarity, episode 11, I tackled the Obi-Wan and Anakin mini-series, and that was written by Charles Soule, and I really recommend that. In episode 28, I did the Master and Apprentice book review, which is Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, and it is a book written by Claudia Gray, so that's really cool. And then last week was episode 31, which was Obi-Wan's Age of Republic one-shot comic. Now, the reason obviously is because, Obi-Wan is very central in the first 6 films, and also in the Clone Wars he's in it quite a lot as well, and also he's going to have his own series too, Kenobi, which is coming out next year. So this is all quite apt, and the Kenobi series is going to be set on his time on Tatooine, so it'll be interesting to see what stuff that's in these comics, if any, are going to be used within the series. Now, just for clarity, Obi-Wan Kenobi was born 57 years before the Battle of Yavin on a planet called Stewjon, and just for clarity with the films that he's in Phantom Menace he was 25, in Attack of the Clones he was 35, and also in Clone Wars, and then throughout the Clone Wars and then to the end of it, which is basically Revenge of the Sith, he was 38 years old, and then when he dies in A New Hope he is 57 years old. Now, as I said, there are 4 stories here, but the last one is like a mini-story. For clarity, these appear in issues of the main run of Star Wars comics 7, 15, 20, and then the mini-story is in issue number 37. These are all from the first run of Star Wars comics, which started in 2015 and have now finished, and they were all written by Jason Aaron. They're released at varying times and have different artists and colorists and etc, so I'll go through them when I come to each story, and as I said, 3 main ones and 1 mini one, plus a few extra little bonus facts as I normally do. So the first one I'm tackling is issue number 7, as I said, written by Jason Aaron. The artist is Simone Bicachi, and the colorist is Justin Ponsor. It was released on July 2015. The trade paperback, which is Star Wars Volume 2, which is Showdown on Smuggler's Moon, that was released in January 2016, and as I said at the start, the collection of all of these stories is going to be out in November 2020. So let's start by reading the crawl. From the Journals of Old Ben Kenobi, the last of his breed. While searching for answers in his quest to become a Jedi, Luke Skywalker has uncovered a journal written by Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, a journal that Kenobi specifically left behind for Luke to find. The journal details Kenobi's adventures during the time he was hiding on Tatooine. What follows is an excerpt from that journal. And for clarity, all of these stories are based on Tatooine because it's when Obi-Wan was basically watching over Luke. So Obi-Wan's walking in a town and he witnesses some thugs demanding some water from some passers-by and things. He walks past and tries to really ignore it, and throughout these comics there is a monologue of Obi-Wan, and he basically says how it was already hard being a Jedi, but it was actually even harder trying to stop being a Jedi, because obviously when he's on Tatooine he's trying to be incognito, and if he gets his lightsaber out constantly and is always making a fuss and doing a lot of things, he's going to attract a lot of attention to himself and then potentially to Luke. And this comic is saying that by the Great Drought, Obi-Wan had not touched his lightsaber in years. So the Great Drought, it's just, as it sounds, it's like a drought, there's barely any water. And on Tatooine, a lot of the farmers, including Owen and Beru Lars, which is the uncle and auntie of Luke Skywalker, they have a moisture farm. That's quite a common thing on Tatooine. It's one of the I think, quite standard jobs in a sense. You just have these, I think, moisture evaporators or something, and it's basically just these things outside that catch water. And Obi-Wan calls himself just, Ben the Hermit, the relic, the thing that no one's really spoken about or even cares about at all at the moment. And then it goes to Uncle Lars, because he basically wouldn't allow Obi-Wan to train Luke. Now, for a bit of information, so there's Owen and Beru Lars, which are the people that you see in A New Hope, and they're also the people that you see at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and you also see them in Attack of the Clones as well. And it's essentially Shmi Skywalker, so Anakin's mum. She got freed from slavery by Klieg, who is Owen Lars' dad, and in Attack of the Clones, when Anakin goes there and speaks to Klieg, Owen and Beru are there, and he goes off and, finds Shmi, who's been captured by Tusken Raiders and whatnot, and then brings her back. And essentially, Owen is the son of Klieg, so he is, because Klieg married Shmi, he is Anakin's stepbrother, so he's like the step-uncle of Luke and Leia, technically. But also, I can't find explicit confirmation of their birth years in canon. In Legends, essentially, by the time of A New Hope, Owen is about 50, and Beru is just under that. As I say, I don't really normally like using Legends for information, but I looked at online, and you can get a vague idea of how old people are, I suppose. But Tatooine's harsh sun and things generally ages people a bit more, or that's the explanation that they give for all the actors aging hugely suddenly between the prequels and the sequels, is that having two suns and things and such harsh conditions with a lot of the sand and etc. makes people age quicker, which may explain it. So anyway, what happens in this one is Jabba's thugs approach the Lars homestead for the water tax, essentially. So they go around and make Jabba basically make sure that everyone who's collecting water gives him some. Kenobi manages to use a mind trick to basically get them to leave, and then he comments on the fact that he's trying to really hide and not really make himself seen again and things, and trying to protect Lars and whatnot without causing too much of a scene is quite difficult. And then it goes back to him being in town, and then there's thugs with guns again, threatening loads of people and threatening citizens and basically saying they're going to open fire on loads of people. And there's several thugs there, and Kenobi just kind of walking past. And as they all go to shoot, all of the guns sort of misfire, and everyone's like really confused of how that could have possibly happened. And after that, he doesn't return to the town due to he doesn't want to attract attention to himself. He does also speak with Qui-Gon, and although you don't hear Qui-Gon speaking back or see Qui-Gon or anything, he is often in the comics speaking to Qui-Gon and things, and it's confirmed in the Master and Apprentice short story, which is in the Certain Point of View book, and the Master and Apprentice short story is also written by Claudia Gray, as well as the big book. The Master and Apprentice short story is based just before Luke meets Obi-Wan, and it's got Obi-Wan speaking to Qui-Gon, so it is confirmed that Qui-Gon could speak with Obi-Wan and things, and obviously Yoda does say at the end of Revenge of the Sith to Obi-Wan that he's managed to commune with Qui-Gon, who's managed to continue life after being one with the Force, and that is all explained in sort of Clone Wars, so I'm not going to delve into that right now. Obi-Wan is saying to Qui-Gon that he feels lost and he wishes that he was there to kind of guide him a bit more and things, and then he senses something off. It turns out that Owen and Beru were looking for Luke, who has basically wandered off by himself and is actually in front of all these thugs trying to get water tax. Luke tried to steal the thugs' water to basically give back to the farmers they took it from, and the thugs are kind of squaring up to him. At this point, Luke is quite a young boy. He seems to be about 8 or so, I think. It's maybe that sort of age, because obviously in A New Hope he was 19. So it's, probably about 10 years before that, if not even younger. And as Luke sort of squares up to things and the thugs start to get a bit more serious, the lights on the thug speeders blow out. Then one of the thugs suddenly says something's grabbed him. He starts to scrabble at the floor and he's getting pulled away into the darkness and then gets thrown away. And this is, Obi-Wan's the one doing this. Luke then gets just sort of knocked out as the thugs kind of struggle to figure out what on earth is going on. And Obi-Wan is just picking the thugs off one by one, force pulling them into the darkness. There are also some droids there, which are the LOM droids. And they actually say out that they would gut the boy like a bantha to get Obi-Wan out. Now, for clarity, the reason you may recognise LOM is, for quite big Star Wars nerds, is that in Empire Strikes Back, there's that scene with the multiple bounty hunters. You've got Boba Fett, you've got Bosk, you've got Dengar, you've got IG-88, and you've also got 2 other ones. One is called 4-LOM, and one's called Zuckuss. And if you played the LEGO Star Wars games, you may remember those as well. Essentially, the LOM droids are protocol droids who are prone to having their personality matrix corrupted, so essentially just go off the deep end a little bit and don't really have any masters. And they have like bug heads, so when you see it in Empire Strikes Back 4, LOM looks like a robot version of Zuckuss almost, and the reason for that is because they're bug-headed and they're meant to look like the Gand. And for clarity, Zuckuss is a Gand. So Zuckuss is the species Gand, and the species of Gand basically made these protocol droids that look like them, kind of, bugheads, and then these ones often kind of go off the rails with their personality matrices and often become assassin droids or bounty hunters and things like that. So anyway, they're out. I had a couple of LOM droids basically threatening Obi-Wan, trying to say that whatever's out there, trying to get them, they'll gut the boy like a bantha. And Obi-Wan crushes both of the LOM droids with these gigantic rocks, destroying them pretty instantly. There's then seemingly one sort of thug left, and he's kind of panicking a little bit, and Obi-Wan seems to force push him into where his speeder is, and the bonnet of the speeder is lifted up. The thug falls into that area, and then the bonnet closes quite hard on the thug's head. Kenobi then takes the sort of passed out Luke home, and he shortly wakes up and then can't really remember what happened or how he got back or anything like that. Then the comic ends with a little monologue from Obi-Wan, so I'm just going to read that. The farmers got their water back, enough to survive a bit longer. About a week later, the drought finally lifted, and the evaporators start churning again. Jabba was enraged and vowed to scour the desert to find the thief, but no one knew who he was. Not the guards he'd beaten or the farmers he'd helped. No one knew what he looked like. No one knew what to call him. My name is Obi-Wan Kenobi, the last of my order, but this is not the end of the Jedi. All it took was a young boy's courage to assure me of that. Let us hope that someday soon I can tell the boy that story, and so many others. And then the comic truly ends with just like a couple of panels of Luke saying, "Can you stay for a little bit longer, R2?" So the second Obi-Wan story is issue number 15, and obviously the writer's Jason Aaron, the artist is Mike Mayhew, and he seems to have done the penciling, the inking and the colouring, so nice and easy there. The issue was released in January 2016, and then it was included in the trade paperback of Volume 3, Rebel Jail of the main run of Star Wars comics in August 2016. So I'm not going to read the whole crawl on this one because each of these crawls is basically the same, but the last couple of sentences is different, so I'm just going to say, the journal details Kenobi's adventures during the time he was in hiding on Tatooine, including when Obi-Wan rescued a young Luke from Jabba the Hutt's thugs during the Great Drought. What follows is an excerpt from that journal. So this story starts a year after the Great Drought, so a year after the previous comic. Obi-Wan is watching Luke fly a T-16. Now for clarity, a T-16 Skyhopper was basically similar to the Lambda-class T-4A shuttle, basically the Imperial shuttle that you see in a lot of the Star Wars films, the 3 fins, one coming up the top and 2 coming off the corners, that standard Imperial shuttle. It looks pretty similar to that, it's just more triangular. So Luke flies through Beggar's Canyon, being beckoned on by Biggs Darklighter and some of his other friends and whatnot. He flies through Beggar's Canyon and then heavily damages the shuttle, which he can't afford to repair. And Obi-Wan muses to himself that Luke was like Anakin in many ways. Owen grounds Luke, and he says to Luke, "As long as I live, you'll never fly again." Goes back to Obi-Wan, who tried to become invisible after the sort of incident with the thugs, obviously trying not to get caught and things. And after knowing what happened with Luke and the Skyhopper, Obi-Wan goes to the Jawas, and it turns out that the Jawas have been victims to raids which were caused by Tusken Raiders. So, as a favour to the Jawas, Obi-Wan fends off some Tusken Raiders without his lightsaber, and he said that he felt like a Jedi again. Once again, doesn't want to attract attention, so he ends up just doing hand-to-hand combat, kind of using their weapons against them, and it's pretty cool to look at. Then, while at the market, Luke and Owen are there, sort of shopping and whatever, and Luke gets given a box by the Jawas filled up with parts for the Skyhopper, and then before he can even try and give them back, they're gone, and so Luke thanks Owen, because he thought that he bought them for him. Then it changes to sort of more nighttime, and Obi-Wan is just chilling in his hut, and Owen approaches. He says that it's very strange that his farm is the only one that's never been attacked by Tusken Raiders or Jabba's thugs or anything like that. And he says now that even Jawas are suddenly giving them away parts for free. And Obi-Wan says, well, it sounds to me like you're really blessed, the Force works in mysterious ways. And Owen says, no, you do, you crazy Jedi, but it ends now. So I'm just going to read their little exchange. So this is Owen starting. I told you, I'm not going to let you warp the boy like you did his father. You brought him to me to protect, and that's what I'm doing. I'm protecting him from you. I'm not asking to train the boy. You've made yourself quite clear on that matter. But Luke has the potential to be something truly remarkable, just as his father was, before you got him killed. Haven't you murdered enough Skywalkers already, Kenobi? This one's only a boy, a foolhardy boy who's too much like his father as it is. We both know what happens if he ever leaves Tatooine. He won't be coming back. Not alive, at least. I only ever wanted to help. And I believe I've made it clear that we don't want your help. You're a dangerous man, Obi-Wan Kenobi, whether you see it or not. Trouble always has a way of finding you, though, doesn't it? Though I suppose it doesn't have to look very hard. That trouble is going to get someone seriously hurt someday, and do us all a favour, and keep the trouble to yourself. And Obi-Wan's sort of final thoughts on this is a little monologue, and he says, "He was right. I wasn't very good at keeping out of trouble, even in the middle of the desert. But that trouble would never find its way to Luke, not while I still lived. And if there was one thing I'd gotten surprisingly good at over the years, other than finding trouble, it was not dying. Just ask Darth Maul or Count Dooku or General Grievous. Just ask Jabba the Hutt." And then it cuts to the last couple of pages is Jabba the Hutt. And it's Jabba asking someone for a demonstration before he hires him for a certain job. And then you see a big collection of Gamorrean guards, which are those green pigmen things that guard Jabba's palace. Several of them get shot and beaten, destroyed, and you can't really see what is fully going on. And then Jabba's protocol droid that translates for him says, "Okay, stop now. Jabba will pay you half now and half of once you found the man who's ambushed his water tax collectors during the Great Drought, and then there'll also be a bonus if you keep him alive." And he says, "Do you find these terms acceptable, Black Krrsantan?" And any of you who have been listening onto this show before, or have paid attention to any of the Aphra comics, or the Darth Vader comics for that matter, will recognise Black Krrsantan as a large black Wookiee. And he has some scars on his face, but in this panel specifically, he doesn't have scars on his face. So, what does that mean? And that's the end of the second comic. So for the third story in the Journals of Old Ben, it is written by Jason Aaron once again, and the artist is also Mike Mayhew, just like the previous one. This issue was released in June 2016 and can be found in the trade paperback of Volume 4 of the main run of Star Wars comics called Last Flight of the Harbinger. That was out January 2017, and then obviously the trade paperback of all of these is going to come out in the next few weeks. The plot of this one continues straight as the previous one ended. So obviously we saw Black Krrsantan, and now the cover of this actual artwork is Obi-Wan fighting Black Krrsantan. So I'm going to read you a bit of the crawl, the part that doesn't repeat itself. The journal details Kenobi's adventures while watching over young Luke on Tatooine, including when Jabba the Hutt hired the Wookiee Black Krrsantan to hunt Obi-Wan down for defeating his thugs during the Great Drought. What follows is an excerpt from that journal. So the comic starts with 2 of Jabba's thugs saying that 5 of Jabba's saltiest warriors were beaten senseless here, as well as 2 droids were destroyed and smashed by giant rocks, or at least that's what they were saying, while screaming when Jabba fed them to the Rancor for obviously messing up, essentially. So they're speaking to Black Krrsantan in the area that Obi-Wan beat all those guys up, saying we don't really know, and they basically saying, "Go on then, Black Krrsantan, go find out who did this." Now, a little bit of information about Black Krrsantan. He was a Wookiee exiled from Kashyyyk. He was made to fight in fighting pits by the Zonti brothers, and he was actually introduced in the first of the Darth Vader comics. He's basically an associate of Dr. Aphra. So in the Aphra series and the first run of Darth Vader comics, and Aphra's in it quite a lot, Black Krrsantan is there. He's just a big black Wookiee with scars on his face. But at the moment in the story, in this comic, he has not yet got those scars. So at the Lars homestead, Owen is looking for Luke and he wants to apologise to him. He's got some parts and things. I think they're the parts that Obi-Wan gave him, basically, or Obi-Wan got the Jaws to give him in the previous comic. He's apologising to Luke for yelling at him and telling him he'll never fly again and all that sort of other jazz. And Black Krrsantan basically grabs Owen. You see his hand grab him. Luke is then sort of walking away from home. He's basically run away from home, and according to Obi-Wan, this is not the first or the last time that he does that, and then he seems to sense something and then sort of turns around and runs home. He then finds Beru on the floor, who seems to have been attacked. She's got like some minor scratches and things, and she's picking herself up and she's got a gun, and she says that it was a monster who got them, and essentially asked Luke to hide in the maintenance bay while she goes out to find Owen. Luke looks up at the damaged skyhopper and then at the floor, finding the basket with all these parts that have fallen out of it, and he kind of thinks to himself, and then it cuts. So on top of this big mountain hill sort of thing, you've got Black Krrsantan is electrocuting Owen, and Owen is screaming and things and saying, like, "What do you want? I can't understand Wookiee. Tell me, I'll answer whatever questions you have." And then Obi-Wan appears and says he isn't asking you any questions, he just wants you to scream. Obi-Wan says this to Black Krrsantan, and I'm going to read it verbatim. "You're Black Krrsantan, the infamous Wookiee bounty hunter. I've heard of you. I know why you were forced to leave Kashyyyk and how you disgraced your people ever since. Jabba hired you, didn't he? Well, here I am, bounty hunter. I am the man you're looking for. Or am I? You will leave this place at and as he says, is when Black Krrsantan basically swipes him and gives him a massive, either with this electro rod he's got, or just punches him in the face. It's kind of unclear. But he hits him, and Obi-Wan collapses to the floor. And the little monologue thing that you get is I was really hoping that was going to work, and that I wouldn't even need a lightsaber. The dangers that would come from outing myself as a Jedi on Tatooine were so great. And I didn't care what happened to me, but I sure had to make sure no harm would ever come to. And then Black Krrsantan also bites him on the arm and a bit of blood splurts out. So I said the little bit that I just read was inside of Obi-Wan's head, but obviously the little bit before that was him directly speaking to Black Krrsantan before he got punched. Black Krrsantan then lifts up Obi-Wan by his neck and dangles him over a cliff, and then decides that Jabba will give him more money for Obi-Wan if he is alive, which is what was confirmed in the last issue, so he throws him to one side. He then uses an electrified net gun on Obi-Wan. Now, electrified net guns, they're not in Star Wars canon content a huge amount, but they do feature in an episode or two of the Clone Wars. One of them is the Padawan Lost episode, which is part of the Season 3 finale. It's when Ahsoka gets captured by some Trandoshans, and also in that arc, like an episode or two later, she then meets Chewbacca, which is quite cool, and they're all being hunted by Trandoshans. And it seems that Black Krrsantan likely got them from the Zonti brothers, who were Trandoshans, and Trandoshans were very commonly slavers, so obviously an electric net is potentially the kind of thing that would actually be used on a Wookiee as well, which makes it kind of more ironic. While Obi-Wan's on the floor, Owen tries to be heroic and tries to shove into Black Krrsantan, and it does nothing. He shoves into him, and Black Krrsantan just kind of looks at him, and then Obi-Wan thinks that Owen is definitely not a coward. You have to be quite a strong, hardy person to be able to survive on the harshness of Tatooine. And then Black Krrsantan throws Owen off the cliff. And as Owen's basically falling, Obi-Wan force pushes some rock and gravel at Black Krrsantan that temporarily blinds him. He force pulls his lightsaber to him, cuts out the neck, and then reaches for Owen, who's now hanging off the edge of this cliff. Black Krrsantan lifts up this very huge boulder and is about to use to crush both of them. Obi-Wan manages to do a Jedi flip, slices the boulder, which Black Krrsantan's holding above his head with both hands, and in doing so, the saber blade cuts Black Krrsantan's eye and his face, giving him this big scar down his eye, which, if anyone's read the other comics, you'll know he has quite a prominent scarring. It's quite cool to know he got it from Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan then grabs Owen with the Force, and he's trying to kind of lift him from falling even further off the edge, and Owen can't quite reach from where Obi-Wan's sort of lifting him, and then Black Krrsantan hits Obi-Wan again, and Owen starts to fall. Obi-Wan manages to break Black Krrsantan's neck gun with his lightsaber, and then Black Krrsantan hits Obi-Wan in the face, and then as Owen is falling to his death, and Obi-Wan's thinking how he's failed him and he can't reach out to get him and things, a skyhopper appears, flown by Luke, and manages to catch Owen on the blaster barrels at the front. It doesn't look like the most comfortable landing, but it's better than being a pancake on the floor. Black Krrsantan then fires his Wookiee bowcaster at Obi-Wan, who's deflecting it and says that he is without a doubt the rudest Wookiee he has ever come into contact with. And as he's deflecting these blaster bolts, one of them hits Black Krrsantan's arm and he falls off a cliff. Luke then apologises to Owen, and Owen asks him to come closer, and then Owen gives him a big hug. And then Obi-Wan leaves just before Luke kind of gets adrift of what he's doing or who he is, and then I'm just going to read you the sort of last comments in this comic. So this is kind of like a monologue-y thing again. I searched for Krrsantan among the rocks, but found no body. They breed them tough on Kashyyyk. He had fled off-world, it was said. Jabba was incensed, of course, feeling he'd been betrayed by the bounty hunter. It would be a long time before Black Krrsantan was welcome on Tatooine again. Not a word was spoken between Owen and I was just happy to see him safely return to his family, just as I returned to mine. And this comic panel is Obi-Wan standing in like a herd of banthas, which are those giant sort of cow-ish things that are really furry in the desert. Tusken Raiders are often seen with them. And Obi-Wan says to them, "Hello Nara, you're looking well today. What's the matter, Dolo? Why are you so sad?" And I just think Obi-Wan having friends with banthas, it's just cute and cracks me up. And then the last few things Obi-Wan says is, once again, the monologue. Life carried on, much as it always had. In this harsh and rugged place, where all could seem hopeless, but where sometimes, inexplicably, new hopes were forged, in blood, and fire, and sand, and sky. And that's where that comic ends, with Luke in the skyhopper flying into the distance with a massive grin on his face. And so the final story of the old Ben journals. This is actually a mini story within issue 37. So issue 37 of Main Run of Star Wars Comics, it's got a whole story, and then the last few pages is this sort of bonus story. Now this bonus story is written by Jason Aaron once again, as well as someone called Dash Aaron. The artist is Andrea Sorrentino, and the colorist is Lee Loughridge. And this was released in October 2017, and the trade paperback, which is volume 6 of the Star Wars Comics, was released in December 2017. Now this one is actually called The Sand Will Provide. That's the name of this little short story if you ever want to look it up or anything like that. And I'm just going to read the crawl for that as well. It is a period of survival in the galaxy. As war rages on between the Galactic Empire and the Rebellion, the battle of everyday survival continues for those trying to live a normal life. Between the scorching heat of the twin suns on Tatooine and the vast deserts of the Jundland Wastes, the life of a Tusken Raider is not an easy one. But when a world has turned its back on the Tusken Raiders, they always have the sand to call their home. Now I just want to clarify with this comic, there's not that much dialogue. A lot of it is just a monologue that you find out at the end is Obi-Wan, but it's fairly obvious with me doing this podcast. It's Obi-Wan basically speaking about how Tusken Raiders are in a lot of ways. It's a very interesting one. I'm not going to read every single word of it. And also it's quite a nice visual comic as well. It's not quite the same as Coda, which I tackled a little while ago. It has no text in it. This definitely does have text in it. It's just that it is much more of a visual thing. You're kind of watching the journey of this young Tusken Raider. So I do really recommend you read this one as well. And if you're making your way through all the main Star Wars comics anyway, you will get there eventually. Or if you pick up the trade paperback of the Journals of Old-Ben Kenobi, which I would recommend, that'll also be the case too. So generally, in brief with this one, there's some thugs that shoot at some banthas and things, and then Obi-Wan's monologue thing says that some say that Tusken Raiders can actually speak to banthas, that they're spiritually linked. And so that means that obviously they have a much deeper connection to them that normal people have, so killing one of them is not a great thing. And Obi-Wan continues to say with the Banthas and the Tuskens that without one, the other could not survive. So it sees this Tusken Raider who's looked and found this dead Bantha after those people sort of shot at them. And he also goes on to say, in the Jundland Wastes, every day is a struggle. When hunters return to the Tusken village with a few black melons and freshly killed Dune lizards, it is a cause for celebration. The sands will always provide. And while this is happening, you're seeing this Tusken along with their child sort of walking along and things, but the people who saw them over the ridge who shot the Banthas, they seem to be tracking them. And the people that are tracking them appear to be farmers because they call out and say, they're the ones that attacked our farms, let's get them. And so these farmers start to attack and shoot all these Tusken Raiders in their own village. The young one that we saw like the previous page or two, was a young Tusken Raider, you can tell because they're only about 3 feet high, and there's like this paternal thing that you can see going on with their parent. And the young one does manage to escape and things, but then seems to sort of pass out from exhaustion or whatever it is, they seem to just kind of pass out in the sand. Then Obi-Wan says, they say Tusken language has over 50 words for sand. The sand is their everything, their cradle, their grave, and their life's blood in between. But the Tuskens must always remember that there's one thing the sand will never be, their friend. And while that's being said, you can see this hooded figure, wearing wraps and things, walk up to this young Tusken Raider, put their hand on them, and then leave, and then this Tusken Raider gets up again. So assumedly Obi-Wan goes off and helps this little Tusken. The young Tusken then sees some sort of civilization and wanders towards it, and it turns out to be Mos Eisley, and he goes into the Mos Eisley cantina. A little bit of information about that. The Mos Eisley Cantina is also called Chalmun's Spaceport Cantina. The bartender is a gentleman called Wooher, and the owner of the cantina is actually a Wookiee named Chalmun. Now, this is all kind of explained a little bit more in the Certain Point of View book, which the cantina, there's like 5 or 6 stories in the cantina, and a couple of them are a bit slow and don't really go anywhere. But there is one about the bartender, and it's quite interesting hearing that the bartender, when he says to 3PO and R2-D2, hey, no droids allowed in here and stuff, one of the reasons he hates droids so much is because in the Clone Wars, his parents were killed by droids, which is quite an interesting little bit of flavour text there. And then also for clarity, the Mos Eisley Cantina, or Chalmun's Spaceport Cantina, whichever you want to call it, it obviously features in loads of things, but it's in A New Hope. That's the main thing. In certain Clone Wars episodes, Ventress goes into it. As I said, there's loads of Certain Point of View stories about it. It's in The Mandalorian Chapter 5, oddly enough, and it is also in the Dark Disciple book as well. So it does appear in lots of other canon content, as well as stuff that's not just centered around the original trilogy. But yeah, it's quite famous for people outside of the Star Wars universe, but for inside the Star Wars universe, it's just a bar, really. That's just one of the main bars in Mos Eisley. So this child goes in there and tries to reach for a glass that's on the side, and then Wooher, the bartender, says, no sand, people, and kicks him out. So this young kid gets thrown out, like literally thrown out of this cantina, and falls on the floor in front of a couple of stormtroopers. And the stormtroopers tell the child to leave. He doesn't, presumably he doesn't understand common language, as in the language of common. And so they say, okay, fine, we'll have to grab him. And they're arguing over which one's going to grab which, because the last one they grabbed, they had to kill, or whatever, this sort of bickering between stormtroopers trying to get out of doing the standard things. And then Obi-Wan walks up and uses a mind trick on them, basically saying, look, I'll make sure this little one gets home, don't worry, just let him go. And then Obi-Wan basically helps him get back to his tribe. And I'm just going to read the last few things Obi-Wan says. The sand will provide, the Tuskens say, as it has for centuries. The sand is life, a hard life for sure, but the only life they've ever known. A life far away from the Sith or the machines of war. I envy them that. The sand will always provide. Indeed, it will. But sometimes the sand needs a little help. Don't we all? And then it shows Obi-Wan, old Obi-Wan, as in A New Hope Obi-Wan, sat at the top of this rock, kind of watching down on the Tusken Raiders, making sure they're okay. So obviously, Obi-Wan definitely takes a special interest in the Tusken Raiders to try and understand them more, see them more as people, and obviously that's how he can kind of fend them off when they attack Luke, and he can kind of get away with not necessarily having to be at war with them all the time. And also, I'm not going to say anything to spoilerize regarding The Mandalorian. Obviously, the new episode just came out. I'm not going to say anything spoilery, but obviously in that episode, Tusken Raiders feature in it, and the way the Mandalorian interacts with them is actually more sophisticated than actually Obi-Wan does, but you can see that sort of there are ways to communicate. They're not just complete savages. Obviously, they do raids and they do kill a lot of people and things like that, but they live quite a hard and harsh life on Tatooine due to the lack of water and lots of other things there. But I really think the latest episode of The Mandalorian gives a really, really good insight into the Tusken Raiders, as well as this Obi-Wan, or the Sands of Provide story, as well as other little bits and pieces you can find, like Coda, for example, that I've mentioned before. So, yeah, that is pretty much everything about the Journals of Obi-Wan Kenobi. As I have said in November, I'm recording this now on Halloween, and it's going to be released on Halloween, so literally tomorrow onward, I think it's the second week of November, the trade paperback collection of the Journals of Obi-Wan Kenobi is going to be out, and as I said, this is going to have all the things I've spoken about in here, so issue number 7, 15 and 20, all in full are going to be in there. The mini story, The Sands Will Provide, that's also going to be in there as well, and then also the Star Wars Volume 5, Yoda's Secret War, which is what I'm tackling in full next week, that's also in there. So if you listen to this week's one, tune in for next week as well, and then if you really enjoy that and you want to read your own, then you should be able to buy the trade paperback collection of all of these stories as well. So nice little bow, very convenient timing there for me. But yeah, that's basically it from me, guys, on this part. As I have said, next week is going to be Yoda's Secret War, which is quite cool. That's going to be the 5th volume of the main run of Star Wars comics. Then I'm going to do Aphra Volume 1, so the first run of Dr. Aphra comics. I'm going to do the first volume of that, which is set chronologically straight after the end of the Darth Vader comics, but they do run parallel still to the main run of Star Wars comics. And the reason I say that is because, as I say, next week's Yoda's Secret War, the week after that is Dr. Aphra Volume 1, the week after that I'm probably going to do the next Age of Republic one-shots. I'm either going to do Padme and Anakin, or I'm going to do Jango and Grievous. I may do Jango and Grievous on the basis that Jango Fett will probably marry in quite nicely with certain stuff of the latest series of The Mandalorian, what's kind of going in there, him searching for other Mandalorians. Obviously Jango Fett wore Mandalorian armor, but in canon it's kind of shrouded in a bit of mystery if he is or isn't Mandalorian. George Lucas said he isn't, but whole rabbit holes of information there. So I'll be delving into Jango Fett, I think, a little bit after that. And then the week after that is going to be the Screaming Citadel, which is the Dr. Aphra and main run of Star Wars crossover. And then the week after that will probably be the other Age of Republic ones. So that's kind of what you can look forward to coming up. As I said, it's basically just Yoda's Secret War next week, which is going to be I haven't actually read it to myself yet, but it's going to be basically the biggest canon look of Yoda's life outside of Clone Wars and the main Star Wars films, because there's not really that much information about Yoda there. So quite excited for that one, and I'll give as much information as we have about Yoda, even though we don't know his species, and we don't know a lot of things about him in canon or in Legends, but we know a lot less in canon. But that's basically what you can look forward to. And just check out my other show, Genuine Chit-Chat, where I have other guests on and things like that. And make sure you subscribe, because in the first week of December, I've got a very exciting chat with someone scheduled in and things. I'm not going to say who it is, just in case anything happens and it makes it have to get rescheduled or anything like that, but they are a Star Wars author, of stuff that I have tackled on here before on Star Wars Comics in Canon. So make sure you subscribe for that, not only because of all the cool shows I've got coming up in the November time, but also start of December. It's a real big one coming out that I'm very excited for. So, always appreciate you guys giving me all the support you always do, sharing on social media, check out the other shows on this amazing feed of Comics in Motion, and follow me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat, that's on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I post the photos of the comics that are in this as well on my Instagram posts that I do weekly. I try and do on Saturdays, but sometimes it's Sunday or Monday, where you normally get the covers of the comics that I've been tackling as well, and occasionally the title crawl and maybe the odd photo of if something looked cool there as well. But that is basically it for me, guys. Thank you as always, really appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys next Saturday, and as always, may the Force be with you.